Reddit post title. At the party, I warned her, one more dance with him, and I'd walk. What she did next changed everything. Her necklace was backwards again. That's how I knew. I saw it from across the room, spun around, the clasp resting just above the dip of her collarbone. She always twists it when she's nervous, or when she wants to be touched. And he noticed too, of course. He noticed everything. He leaned in like he was smelling her thoughts. Everyone else was too drunk to care. Too busy filming themselves with half-melted birthday cake, or trying to pretend a playlist of early 2000s club hits was some kind of shared cultural moment. But I stood there, by the half-empty ice bucket, gripping a sweating plastic cup and watching my wife grind 3 years of marriage into dust, one slow song at a time. The worst part? It wasn't even our fight. We didn't even argue. We were past that stage. We were two people who let things rot in silence and smiled through the stench. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I interrupted. I cut through the crowd like an unpaid bar tab, waited until the song ended, and leaned in between them. I didn't say hello. I didn't nod at him. I just looked her dead in the eyes and said, "One more dance with him, Thea, and I'm gone." The music didn't stop. No dramatic gasp. Just the electric pop of a champagne bottle opening somewhere, and a few people laughing like nothing was happening, because to them, nothing was. To me, it was the last thread holding a dead marriage together. She blinked once slow, like she was trying to decide if I was bluffing or having a breakdown. Then, this is burned into me. She looked past me, smiled at him, and said, "Then I guess you better get going." I did. I walked out. But that wasn't the betrayal. That was the preview. What she did next. That's the part I'm still trying to understand. That's the part that changed everything. That's the part that made me start writing this. I wish I could say I walked straight out, called a cab, and had the dignity to let the night die right there. But I didn't. I made it 2 blocks down the street before I realized I didn't have my phone. It was still in her bag. She always held on to it at parties because I hated how my jeans made it look like I was carrying bricks in my pockets. Stupid detail, I know. But that's the thing about betrayal. It never comes clean. It always drips through the cracks of little compromises. So I went back. I didn't go inside, not right away. I stood across the street from the Velvet Room, under a bus shelter with a flickering light, and watched people trickle in and out. It was maybe 45 minutes later when I saw Jules come out the back exit, alone. Hair a little messier. Collar open. No jacket. No Thea. He lit a cigarette and leaned against the wall like he'd just finished a great meal. I crossed the street. Not because I wanted to fight him. I don't think I've thrown a punch since high school, but because I needed to see his face. I needed to look him in the eyes and figure out what kind of man does that. He saw me coming and smirked. That same smirk he wore on the dance floor like he already owned something of mine. "You forget something?" he asked. "Where is she?" I asked back. I was trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel it breaking in my throat. He shrugged. "Inside, I guess." "You guess? You walked out, man. Don't make your problems mine." That line. That's the one that made the blood drain out of my hands. That's the line that made me realize this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't some blurry boundary thing between old friends. This was deliberate. I left him there, still smoking, and walked back into the building through the front. I didn't care how it looked. I scanned the dance floor. She wasn't there. I checked the bar, the bathrooms, the little side lounge with the velvet couches and fake candles. Nothing. I tried the back hallway, the one marked staff only. And that's when I heard it. Muffled voices. 2. One of them hers. I froze. My heart wasn't beating, it was clawing. I didn't go further. I didn't barge in. I just stood there, outside a locked maintenance door, and listened to my marriage end one whisper at a time. She didn't come out for another 20 minutes. And when she did, she looked surprised to see me standing there. No guilt. No panic. Just surprise. "Oh," she said, like she'd bumped into me at the grocery store. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She reached into her purse, pulled out my phone, and handed it to me without making eye contact. "You left this," she said. That was all. Then she walked past me, down the hallway, and back into the party like nothing happened. I stood there, holding the cold plastic in my hand, and finally understood. I wasn't married to a stranger. I was married to someone who had stopped choosing me a long time ago. And that hour she disappeared? It wasn't missing. It was very, very accounted for. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch in the living room with all the lights off, staring at the ceiling fan spinning like a slow confession. Thea didn't come home until almost 3 a.m. I heard her keys in the door, the clack of her heels on the floorboards, the sound of her breath, steady, composed, like nothing was broken. Not us. Not her. Just me. She didn't say anything. She didn't even look at me. Just walked to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and then disappeared into the bedroom like I was some forgotten piece of furniture. I waited for a text, a call, an explanation, anything. But all I got was silence and the hum of the fridge as it kicked on and off, like even the appliances were trying to fill the gap between us. By morning, she was gone again. Left a note on the counter. Jim, then brunch with Talia. Don't wait up. Don't wait up. I sat there staring at those 3 words like they were written in blood. I wasn't angry. Not in the way people expect. It was worse. I was hollow. Like someone had scooped me out from the inside and left a paper-thin version of myself behind to keep pretending everything was okay. But something in me, some sliver of whatever was left, wanted truth. Not guesses. Not assumptions. Truth. So I went back to the velvet room. It was a Tuesday morning. Place was closed. Chairs stacked on tables, floors half mopped. I knocked on the glass until a guy in a black apron finally came to the door. I told him I left my wallet, which was a lie. He told me to wait while he checked. Another lie. I didn't care. I wasn't there for my wallet. I was there for the cameras. And I saw them. The hallway where she disappeared? There was a motion-triggered camera above the staff door. A cheap dome one, angled downward. The guy, probably thinking he was doing me a favor, let me peek at the feed when he scrolled back to the right night. What I saw confirmed everything I didn't want to believe. At 9:42 p.m., Thea walks down the hallway. Alone. 3 minutes later, Jules follows. She doesn't look surprised when he arrives. They talk. Briefly. Then she opens the maintenance door with something from her purse. A key? A card? She knew how to get in. They both disappear inside. The door closes. No one else goes in. They don't come out until 10:27. That's 45 minutes. 45 minutes of silence on camera. Just that shut door, holding secrets like lungs hold breath. When they emerge, she's adjusting her dress. He's wiping something from the corner of his mouth. They don't speak. They don't laugh. They don't even look at each other. They part ways at the hallway's end like it never happened. But it did. It happened in the silence. In the smudged lens of a cheap camera. In the absence of any need to lie, because to them, I wasn't even a factor anymore. I left without saying a word. Didn't thank the guy. Didn't take a screenshot. Didn't cry. Not yet. On the train ride home, I stared at my own reflection in the window. Pale. Hollow-eyed. And I realized something that chilled me more than the betrayal. She had planned it. She had planned it down to the room, the moment, and the exit strategy. And worse, this wasn't her first time. I didn't confront her. Not that day. Not the day after. I walked around in my own body like it belonged to someone else, like I was renting space inside the skull of a man who hadn't fully accepted what he knew. Something about seeing it, on the grainy footage, the timestamp ticking at the corner like a countdown, froze me. The truth wasn't setting me free. It was cementing me to the floor of our shared life. We still ate dinner together. Chicken and rice on Monday. Soup on Tuesday. I listened to her talk about her coworkers, their drama, a campaign pitch that flopped because clients have no imagination, and I nodded like a trained puppet. She looked me in the eye, laughed at her own stories, even kissed me on the cheek once while handing me a glass of water, and in that moment, I realized the scariest part of all this wasn't that she had cheated. It was that she had gotten good at pretending she hadn't. But everything changed 4 days later, when I decided to clean the guest room closet. It sounds stupid, insignificant, but when you're floating in denial, you start doing odd things to feel in control. For me, that meant organizing shelves no one used, vacuuming corners that hadn't seen light in years, sorting through dusty boxes we brought from our old apartment but never unpacked. That's when I found it. A simple black notebook wedged between a pile of old photo frames and an unused yoga mat. No title, no label, just a thin elastic band holding it shut, warped from years of sitting untouched. Or so I thought. The first few pages were nothing. Doodles, grocery lists, random thoughts. But about halfway through, the handwriting changed. Sharper, faster, emotional. I didn't recognize it at first because it wasn't the neat, curated writing she used for cards and sticky notes. This was raw, unfiltered, like her hand had outrun her conscience. The first sentence that hit me in the gut. It didn't feel like cheating the second time. I stopped breathing. The word sat there like a loaded gun pointed at my chest. I kept reading, unable to stop, even when I wanted to throw it across the room. Entry after entry. Some short, some long, all written in the same urgent ink. There's something about being seen by someone who doesn't see you as broken. Jay remembers things Ezra doesn't. I don't blame Ezra. He's tired. I'm tired. I waited in the hallway for 5 minutes just to hear Jay say my name like he meant it. The second time was easier. The third time, I stopped counting. I wish I didn't love both of them, but I think I might. In different ways. That was the part that shattered me more than any camera footage ever could. She loved him. Not just a fling. Not just some animal impulse in a dark room at a party. She'd crafted a mental space where loving two people felt justifiable. And the worst part? There were no entries about guilt. No lines about me. No pages trying to justify it or wrestle with what it meant for us. I wasn't even in the margins. I had become a footnote in a story she wasn't writing for me anymore. I sat there for nearly an hour, notebook in my lap, tears I hadn't planned sliding down my cheeks. I don't even remember crying. I just remember the stillness afterward. The silence so thick it made the walls feel closer. My reality had collapsed in slow motion, and the dust was finally settling. She came home later that evening, carrying Thai takeout, placed it on the counter, smiled. "I got the curry you like," she said, scrolling through her phone. "And the crispy rolls. They were on sale." I didn't respond. I looked at her for a long time. The way her hair curled slightly at the ends. The soft, clean smell of her jacket. The way her hand twitched when she texted someone. Probably him. I wondered how many more pages of her life she'd written without me. And in that moment, I knew I had to stop waiting for an explanation. Because Thea wasn't going to confess. Thea had already moved on. I was the only one still pretending there was something left to save. I didn't bring up the notebook. Not right away. I wish I could say I slammed it on the dinner table and demanded answers, but I didn't. Instead, I put it back exactly where I found it, between the yoga mat and the photo frames, and walked out of that guest room like I hadn't just read a personal manifesto about how irrelevant I'd become in my own marriage. And then I did something even more pathetic. I agreed to go to dinner with her friends. It was Thea's idea. A little Saturday night thing with the old crew, she called it. I didn't even bother asking who'd be there. At that point, part of me wanted to see how far the rot had spread. How many people in our orbit knew what she was doing and said nothing. I wanted to see it in their faces, the flickers of guilt, the tight smiles, the careful avoidance of certain topics. I wanted proof that I wasn't just crazy, that I wasn't inventing betrayal because I was bored or lonely or broken. We met at some trendy place in the West End. One of those restaurants that serves food on slabs of stone and acts like chairs with backs are outdated technology. We were late, of course. She was fussing with her hair, her lipstick, the way her shoes matched her coat. Meanwhile, I stared at the mirror in our bedroom and wondered when I'd stopped looking like someone worth being faithful to. When we arrived, the group was already halfway through appetizers. Smoked beet tartare, balsamic foam, the kind of dishes you pretend to enjoy while secretly praying someone orders fries. There were 5 people at the table. 2 I vaguely recognized from some wedding we went to last summer. One girl who hugged Thea too long and whispered something in her ear that made them both laugh. And then, Jules. He was seated at the far end, casual and smug, like he'd been invited into the inner sanctum. He didn't flinch when he saw me, just raised his glass slightly and nodded, as if we were co-stars in some ongoing improv act, and he was thanking me for playing along. I sat across from him. Thea didn't sit beside me. She took the seat beside him. That detail may seem small, but it wasn't. It was a message. Not loud, not obvious, just sharp enough to register. Throughout the meal, I barely spoke. I watched. I listened. Jules talked about a recent trip to Berlin. Thea asked questions she already knew the answers to. The girl beside me, Annika, I think, asked if we were still planning our Italy trip. I nodded before realizing Thea hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Another lie, it seemed. This time, one of omission. Halfway through the second course, Jules leaned forward and made some half-joke about how married life must get boring if you don't shake it up once in a while. Everyone laughed. Even Thea. I didn't. Instead, I excused myself to the restroom, not because I needed to go, but because I needed to breathe. I stood at the sink staring at the tile, listening to the muted clatter of plates and the laughter echoing through the thin wall. For the first time, it occurred to me that I wasn't just being cheated on. I was being humiliated. Openly. Repeatedly. In front of people who used to smile at our wedding photos and ask how we met. And I had let it happen. I had played along. I had made it easy. When I returned to the table, dessert had been ordered. Some kind of lavender panna cotta. I didn't touch mine. Jules made another joke. Thea leaned into him when she laughed. Her hand brushed his arm like it belonged there. No one reacted. I don't remember the end of that dinner. Just the sound of her heels on the pavement as we walked back to the car, and the way she hummed to herself like nothing had happened. She even offered me a bite of the dessert she took to go. I declined. That night, as she undressed in the dark, I sat in bed with the TV on mute, staring at her silhouette. I imagined asking her outright, telling her I knew everything, that I'd seen the footage, that I'd read the notebook, that her old friend had laughed in my face without saying a word. But I didn't, because something deeper was growing inside me now. Not rage, not heartbreak, something colder, a seed of strategy. I wasn't going to explode. I was going to watch. I was going to wait. And I was going to make sure the next move belonged to me, not her. 2 days after that dinner, something shifted. It wasn't external, no fight, no revelation, no dramatic confrontation. It was internal, like a cracked bone that finally snaps clean through. I woke up before sunrise, went for a walk, and realized I didn't care if she loved him more than me anymore. What I cared about was that she thought I didn't notice. That she believed I'd keep playing my part in this pantomime marriage while she lived a second life under my roof. There's a kind of insult and betrayal, but there's something worse in being dismissed, in being seen as so weak, so passive, that your pain doesn't even need to be hidden anymore. So I decided to stop grieving and start watching. And that's when Jules made his first mistake. It came as a text. Not to Thea, at least, not directly. It came to me. An accident. A digital slip that revealed more than it should have. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I'd just gotten out of the shower when my phone buzzed on the bathroom sink. No name, just a number I didn't have saved. The message read, "She said you were working late again. Should I park on the side street or use the garage code?" My stomach flipped. I stared at the message, water still dripping from my hair, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I didn't respond. I just stood there, frozen in a towel, rereading it like the words might rearrange themselves into something innocent. They didn't. Jules had meant to text Thea, but he texted me. It was confirmation, not just suspicion, not just camera footage and journal fragments. This was present tense, active, ongoing, and planned. I dried off slowly, got dressed, didn't tell Thea. She was in the living room doing yoga, humming along to some ambient playlist, like her body needed healing more than the marriage she was silently assassinating. I made coffee, kissed her on the head, told her I'd be working late. I wasn't. Instead, I left the house around 3 p.m. and parked a block away, where I could see the side street she'd used before to sneak him in. I turned off the engine, opened a book I didn't plan to read, and waited. It was cold. October wind crept in through the cracked window. I didn't care. Time moved strangely in that car, slow and sharp. Every pair of headlights made my pulse spike. Every pedestrian became a shadow I scrutinized. But then, just past 6 p.m., I saw him. Jules. Walking like he didn't have a secret in the world. He looked up and down the street, then made his way toward my house. He didn't knock, didn't hesitate, just pulled out his phone, glanced at it once, probably rereading his own text, and walked toward the side entrance. That's when I got out of the car. I didn't yell, didn't run. I walked. Deliberate. Calm. Ice in my spine. He didn't see me until he was 2 steps from the gate. When he turned and met my eyes, it was like watching someone realize they'd just stepped onto a trapdoor. His mouth opened. I said nothing, just held up my phone. The message displayed clearly. No words needed. He stammered. Something about a mistake. A mix-up. Didn't mean to, but I wasn't listening. I wasn't interested in his excuses. Because in that moment, it hit me. He wasn't some master manipulator. He was sloppy, arrogant, and most importantly, not afraid of me. That was his mistake. He thought I was weak, that I'd keep swallowing this poison and smiling through it. But weakness, when pushed long enough, becomes precision. I stepped closer, close enough that he had to lean back to maintain space. Then I smiled. Next time, I said, voice steady. Make sure you know who you're lying to. I turned and walked away before he could respond. Got in my car. Drove 2 blocks. Parked again. Then I waited to see if she'd still let him in. 20 minutes later, the porch light turned off, and they disappeared inside. Together. As if my warning meant nothing. As if I was already gone. But I wasn't. Not yet. I had just decided to stop being the victim of the story. I didn't go home that night. After watching her let him in without hesitation, I couldn't bring myself to step foot back into the same walls where they'd touched each other with no fear of consequence. Instead, I drove. No destination. No plan. I let the city lights blur through the windshield while the heater hummed, and my thoughts spiraled in slow, ugly circles. I think I ended up parked in front of an old diner somewhere off 84th, just watching the neon sign flicker against the rain-slick street. I didn't go inside. I just sat there until morning. The next day, I called in sick. First time in years. My boss didn't even sound surprised. I went back home around noon. She wasn't there, probably at the studio, or with him, or wherever it was she went to exist outside our life. I showered, changed clothes, made myself toast I didn't eat. And then, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I went looking for more. Not revenge. Not confrontation. Just answers. The notebook had been a crack in the wall. And once you notice one crack, you start seeing them everywhere. She had a filing cabinet in the guest room. I'd never touched it. It was her space, a leftover from our early years when we still respected each other's boundaries. But boundaries mean nothing when someone's turned your trust into an alibi. So I opened it. Mostly junk. Old freelance contracts, tax receipts, drafts of campaign briefs, art prints she never framed. But at the back, taped to the underside of the bottom drawer, was a small envelope with a rental receipt tucked inside. A storage unit. Signed in her name. Rented 6 months ago. Never mentioned. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it was innocent. Maybe it was for work. Maybe it was leftover furniture or supplies for a project she hadn't finished. But deep down, I already knew. I knew because her secrets had a pattern, hidden in plain sight, casually unexplained, just distant enough that questioning them made me look controlling. The unit was across town. One of those massive indoor facilities with floor-to-ceiling rows of metal doors and a key-code entrance. I drove there with my pulse buzzing in my neck, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other holding the paper like it was proof of my own insanity. The clerk barely looked at me when I gave him the number. Locker 218B, he said. Down the left hall, second row. The hallway smelled like dust and rubber. The kind of smell that clings to memories. I found the unit easily. Standard size. Padlock in place. But I already knew her combination. Birth year, then mine. She used it for everything. She always said it helped her feel connected. It clicked open too easily. I lifted the roll-up door and just stood there. Inside wasn't furniture. Or art. Or business inventory. Inside was another life. Clothing. Not just hers. Men's jackets. A second set of luggage. A pair of sneakers I'd never seen before. A box filled with instant photos. Candid shots of her and Jules in hotel rooms, parks, bars. Her head on his chest. His hand on her thigh. One of her kissing his cheek. Eyes closed like she'd never been safer. There were receipts, too. Hotel bookings. Dinner reservations. A rental lease under her maiden name. For an apartment I didn't even know existed. And then, at the bottom, a small envelope addressed to T. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. I recognized his handwriting immediately. Arrogant pen strokes, unnecessarily large loops in his G's. You don't have to wait much longer. I'm ready when you are. If he suspects anything, don't let it rattle you. He's not the type to make a scene. You and I built this. He's just standing in what we already own. Jay? I sank to the floor, legs numb, the fluorescent light above me buzzing like a fly trapped in glass. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had replaced me. There was an entire infrastructure of lies carefully constructed to phase me out like old software. I wasn't a husband. I was an obstacle, a placeholder. And they weren't just having an affair, they were planning a transition. A clean one. They thought I wouldn't react. They thought I'd just fade. But sitting there in that cold storage unit, surrounded by the remnants of my wife's second life, I made a quiet, precise decision. If they wanted to see how I disappeared, I'd show them. But it wouldn't be the way they expected. I didn't burn anything. That's what most people expect when I tell them I found the storage unit. That I torched it, smashed something. Left a note written in venom and gasoline. But I didn't do any of that. I just stood there in the stale air of that narrow room, breathing through the weight of someone else's future and realizing it didn't include me. And then I closed the door, and I locked it behind me. Not out of mercy, out of finality. That night, I packed a bag. Not a dramatic one. No suitcases thrown open. No shredded photos on the floor. Just a small duffel with a few clothes, my passport, laptop, charger, and the one book I never finished. I left my ring on the nightstand. She didn't come home that evening. I didn't wait up. Instead, I wrote a letter. No rage, no accusations. Just the truth. You made a new life. And I stepped out of it quietly. I'm not angry anymore. I'm awake. Whatever you were chasing, I hope it was worth what you broke to find it. I'm not broken, but I'm done. I placed the letter beside the ring. Then I left. Where I went doesn't matter as much as what happened next. I took a train to a different city. Small coastal town, foggy mornings, clean air, no jewels. I sublet a furnished apartment near a lighthouse. I got a part-time job at a bookstore that smells like cedar and coffee. I started going to therapy, not to grieve her, but to remember myself. I didn't tell anyone where I went. I changed my number, deleted every thread, every photo, every old login. I let my old life end. And for the first time in years, I began to feel quiet inside. I still remember the day I woke up and didn't think of her first. That was a milestone, a strange sort of freedom. I remember the first time I laughed at something alone and didn't feel guilty. I remember the first night I fell asleep without needing to replay the betrayal in my head like a punishment loop. I also remember the first person who made me feel something new again. Her name was Elise. She worked 2 aisles over in the bookstore, quiet, curious, observant in the way people are when they've been hurt, but healed with grace, not bitterness. She didn't ask about my past. She didn't need to, because she met me in the present. We started slowly. Coffee after shifts. Long walks in silence. Book swaps with notes in the margins. And then, eventually, something more. Something that felt real, not loud or dramatic, but steady, honest. One evening, we stood by the shore watching the tide roll in. I told her the story, not all the details, but enough. She didn't interrupt, just held my hand, looked out at the ocean, and said, "That wasn't love. That was performance. What you're doing now, that's love. For yourself first. That's where it begins." And she was right. So if you're reading this because you've been cheated on, lied to, humiliated quietly by the person you trusted most, let me tell you something. You don't need revenge to win. You don't need to prove anything. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can do is walk away, rebuild in silence, and come back stronger with nothing to prove and nothing to hide. Because they didn't destroy me. They released me. And I didn't just survive it. I found peace on the other side of it.